Now, this may sound strange, but I would like to make a case for the defense of this car. Sounds weird, right? Someone trying to defend what everyone repeatedly writes off as the worst car ever made? Yep, America, and indeed the whole world, loves to beat down on this car. But honestly, in this day and age, I think what America needs most of all, especially for the poorest members of our society, is a Yugo. The Yugo was the tiny car that came to our shores with one heroic promise: new car smell for used car money. It was cheap, square, slow, basic, and built with the kind of optimism normally found in late-night television commercials and questionable mail-order exercise equipment. In the United States, it became famous less as transportation than as a punchline, a rolling joke about communist manufacturing, bargain hunting, and what happens when affordable is asked to do the work of good. Yet the Yugo also deserves a second look, not because it was secretly brilliant, but because it dared to sell a brand new car to people who could barely afford a car at all. In modern America, where even entry-level motoring can feel like applying for a small mortgage with cup holders, that idea has become strangely important again. The background began far from American dealer lots. In Kragujevac, Serbia, at Zastava. Zastava was not originally a cheerful little hatchback company. It began as an arms maker in the 19th century, which meant the Yugo's family tree included both economy cars and things one would not want pointed at one's economy car. After World War II, Zastava built vehicles under license, including Jeep-like vehicles and later Fiats. Its post-war car business developed through agreements with Fiat, and by the 1960s and 1970s, it was producing cars based on older Italian designs. The Zastava 750, based on the Fiat 600, became a familiar small car in Yugoslavia. The Zastava 101, related to the Fiat 128, became one of the company's most important models. By the late 1970s, Zastava needed a more modern, entry-level car. The tiny rear-engine 750 was charming, but old. And even in a socialist market, there comes a point when cute and obsolete have to stop sharing an apartment. The new car would use proven Fiat-related mechanical ideas in a shorter, simpler, cheaper hatchback package. The prototype appeared in 1978, and production began in 1980. At home, it was originally called Yugo or Zastava Yugo, later Corral, while export markets came to know it as Yugo. The name sounded tidy, friendly, and conveniently pronounceable by people who did not want to say Zavodi Crvena Zastava before breakfast. The design was simple, because simplicity was the point. The Yugo was a front-wheel drive, 3-door subcompact hatchback with a short wheelbase, an upright roof, 2 large doors, a rear hatch, and the aerodynamic finesse of a filing cabinet caught in a light breeze. It was only about 137 to 139 inches long, roughly 61 inches wide, and weighed under a ton. The spare tire lived under the hood, which made the engine bay look like a small mechanical campsite. The cabin was narrow but useful, with reclining front seats, a folding rear seat, a rear defroster on many U.S. cars, and the general atmosphere of everything necessary and almost nothing else. Cup holders were not part of the dream. The Yugo expected its driver to finish the coffee before leaving. Mechanically, the U.S. market Yugo GV began with a 1.1-liter overhead cam 4-cylinder engine, rated around 55 horsepower, driving the front wheels through a 4-speed manual transmission. It was not fast. It was not medium fast. It was a car in which acceleration happened gradually, like a committee reaching consensus. Period car and driver test data for an early U.S. Yugo GV showed 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 14 seconds, a quarter mile in 19.5 seconds at 68 miles per hour, and a top speed of 86 miles per hour. On paper, this was slower than many impatient thoughts. But for a low-price commuter car in 1985, the mission was not speed. The mission was to move a human being, a modest grocery bag, and perhaps a suspiciously optimistic warranty folder from one place to another. The Yugo's American story belonged largely to Malcolm Bricklin, the entrepreneur who had already helped bring Subaru to the United States, built the gull-wing Bricklin SV1, and imported leftover Fiat-based sports cars as Bertone and Pininfarina products. Bricklin had a talent for finding unlikely cars and surrounding them with very likely publicity. He saw in the Yugo something Americans had not seen in years. A brand new car with a price so low, it seemed to have fallen out of a time machine. Before Bricklin, Miro Keffert and Yugo Cars had explored importing the car to California, but Bricklin's international automobile importers became the main force behind the national U.S. launch. But the number one question hanging on the lips of many people both back then and today, why specifically the Yugo? Europe was full to the brim with economical hatchbacks at the time. Germany had the Volkswagen Polo, the Opel Kadett, and the Opel Corsa, while Italy had the Alfa Romeo 33, the Fiat Uno, the Fiat Tipo, and if you're feeling obscure, the Autobianchi Y10. France was a real lover of the economy hatchback, and several had already appeared on the U.S. market, such as the Renault 5, known over here through sale via AMC as the Renault Le Car. But others existed too, like the rally championship-winning Peugeot 205, the clever and efficient Citroën AX, and the eccentric but practical Peugeot 309. Britain also had a nice selection of hatchbacks, with perhaps its most notable in the 1980s being the Austin Metro. This was a car originally meant to replace the Mini, and while it failed to gain enough traction to succeed the classic original, the resultant car was a practical machine that was once again, and as always, let down by the miserable slew of build quality problems that got thrown in with any British Leyland purchase. But out of all these motoring powerhouses, it was the Yugo that made it to our sunny shores. And the simple answer was, as is so often the case, money. Bricklin was once again facing imminent financial ruin after his previous vehicle import ventures had collapsed in 1984, and he desperately needed a cheap, mass-market car to save his business. His choice of the Yugo, despite it being a communist-made model during the turbulent final years of the Cold War, came simply down to unbeatable wholesale pricing. Mainstream European hatchbacks from brands like Volkswagen, Fiat, British Leyland, or Renault were too expensive to import and sell as budget-tier vehicles in America. But because of Yugoslavia's state-controlled economy and low labor costs, Bricklin negotiated a deal with the state-owned Zastava factory to buy the cars for roughly $1,900 to $2,000 each. The result was the potential for a high profit margin at a record low retail price, with a cheap wholesale cost allowing Bricklin to introduce the Yugo GV, or good value, to the United States for a legendary base price of $3,990, and thus he could maintain a healthy profit margin per unit while undercutting every major competitor on the U.S. market. At the same time, Bricklin shrewdly noted an empty entry-level market niche, as by the mid-1980s, Japanese automakers like Honda and Toyota were moving upscale, adding premium features and raising prices on their compact cars. But Bricklin recognized an untouched void at the absolute bottom of the market for a simple, cheap first car or commuter vehicle. The Yugo matched his established business strategy, mimicking how he originally introduced Subaru of America via the tiny, ultra-cheap Subaru 360 in 1968. Finally, the car had proven legal Fiat mechanicals as unlike other Eastern Bloc lawnmower cars like the Trabant or Wartburg. The Yugo was built using older, licensed Fiat designs and engineering, and thus gave Bricklin a familiar mechanical foundation. However, that's not to say that things would be plain sailing. The Yugo, in order to meet stringent American safety and emissions standards, required over 400 separate factory modifications, including stronger bumpers, lighting changes, emissions equipment documentation, dealer preparation, and hundreds of detail alterations. A special U.S.-oriented production effort was created at Zastava, with hand-picked workers and outside advice aimed at raising quality. That sounded promising. Unfortunately, a plan to raise Yugo quality still began with a Yugo factory, old Fiat bones, cost pressure, political complexity, and a new market where buyers expected cheap cars to work like expensive ones, just smaller and with fewer ashtrays. The first Yugos were shown to the American public at the Los Angeles Auto Show in 1984, reportedly in patriotic red, white, and blue. The real launch came in 1985. The famous advertised price was $3,990 for the Yugo GV, which made it the cheapest new car in America. The initial stood for good value, though critics later proposed several less generous translations. The advertising emphasized affordability above all else. The $39.90 campaign made the price the star. There were jokes, headlines, dealer sign-ups, and a sense that a new kind of bottom-rung motoring had arrived. For people who had been priced out of new cars, this was not just a car, it was an invitation. At first, it worked. Americans bought 3,895 Yugos in 1985, then 35,959 in 1986, and sales peaked at 48,812 in 1987. That was not Toyota Corolla territory, but for a tiny Yugoslav hatchback imported by Malcolm Bricklin, it was a real achievement. Buyers liked the price. Some bought it as basic transportation, some as a second car, some as a first new car, and some because a new car under $4,000 sounded like beating the system. The Yugo was pitched as a modern Model T or Beetle for the 1980s. Simple, cheap, democratic, and unpretentious, it was transportation for people who did not require transportation to flatter them. Then, Americans drove it. Reception was mixed at first, then increasingly brutal. Some reviewers admitted the Yugo was not entirely hopeless. Popular Science found its braking strong among other minicars and called its handling respectable, though it disliked the noise, ride, and weak acceleration. Popular Mechanics found that owners appreciated the low purchase price, and some praised the features the car included for the money. But the wider reputation went downhill like a Yugo with a parking brake off. The car was slow, loud, cramped, and crude. The shifter could be difficult. The interior looked and felt cheap because it was cheap. The fuel tank was small. The gas cap could annoy people. Dealer service was inconsistent. Quality control was uneven. Rust, electrical problems, trim issues, carburation troubles, and general fragility all helped turn the car into a national joke. The maintenance issue that haunted many U.S. owners was the timing belt. The 1.1 and 1.3-liter engines were interference engines, and the timing belt had to be replaced on schedule. Many buyers treated the Yugo like an appliance that should simply run until it did not. Unfortunately, when the timing belt failed, the engine could destroy itself with the efficiency of a Balkan opera finale. That was not always the car's fault in a strict mechanical sense, but it became part of the legend. The Yugo required maintenance discipline from buyers, who had often chosen it because they could barely afford the car, let alone preventive work. Variations followed quickly. The base GV was joined by the GVL, which added slightly nicer trim, the GVS, which looked sportier, the GVC with a sunroof, and the GVX, which used a 1.3-liter engine, 5-speed manual transmission, alloy wheels, ground effects trim, rally lights, and the brave suggestion that the Yugo could be sporty. Sporty was relative. A GVX could outrun a regular GV, but so could a firm tailwind. Later, U.S. cars received the 1.3-liter engine more broadly, and a Renault-designed 3-speed automatic appeared in limited numbers. A Cabrio convertible arrived as well, giving America the chance to experience open-air Yugo motoring, which was either delightful, hilarious, or both. The Cabrio is now one of the most collectible versions, partly because few were imported, and partly because a convertible Yugo sounds like a punchline that escaped into production. The Yugo's U.S. sales collapsed almost as quickly as they had risen. Sales fell to 31,546 in 1988, then 10,576 in 1989, 6,359 in 1990, 3,092 in 1991, and 1,412 in 1992. The reasons were many. The cheap car novelty wore off. Hyundai and other low-cost competitors offered more modern products. The Yugo's reputation became toxic. Dealers struggled. Warranty and service support disappointed buyers. An emissions-related recall of more than 126,000 cars further damaged the image, especially because the carbureted emission system had made an already weak engine drive worse. By 1992, Yugo America was done. The car's end in the United States was also tied to history far larger and darker than bad owner reviews. Yugoslavia began to fracture in the early 1990s. The Yugo itself was almost a rolling federation. Parts came from different Yugoslav republics with electrical components, interior pieces, brakes, mirrors, seatbelts, and other components sourced across the country. As the country broke apart, supply lines broke too. War, sanctions, economic collapse, and later NATO bombing of the Zastava factory in 1999 devastated production. For Americans, the Yugo had become a joke. For workers in Kragujevac, it became part of a national tragedy. Production eventually resumed for local and regional markets, and the Yugo lived on far longer than many Americans realize. Updated versions continued under names such as Coral, Coral IN, Tempo, and Chow. Later cars could have fuel injection, updated interiors, revised bumpers, central locking, electric windows, and even air conditioning. Some late models used Peugeot-related engines. In its home region, the Yugo was not merely the worst car. It was cheap, familiar, repairable, and woven into ordinary life. It was the car people learned to drive in, fixed with relatives, overloaded with luggage, and remembered with complicated affection. Production finally ended in November 2008 after nearly 800,000 had been built. In the United States, the afterlife was different. The Yugo became shorthand for bad cars. It appeared in jokes, sitcoms, movies, lists of automotive failures, and casual insults from people who had never sat in one. It became the car equivalent of a whoopee cushion. Car Talk voted it the worst car of the millennium. Time included it among the worst cars of all time. And comedians discovered that almost any sentence became funnier if the word Yugo appeared near the end. Yet even this infamy gave the car a strange immortality. A forgotten mediocre car disappears, a famous bad car becomes collectible. That is where the Yugo gets interesting. Enthusiasts now preserve them, restore them, register them, and defend them with the determination usually associated with rare Italian sports cars and certain terriers. Low-mileage Yugos can sell for surprising money. Cabrio models attract real collector interest. In Serbia and elsewhere in the former Yugoslavia, younger enthusiasts have embraced the Yugo as nostalgia, cultural symbol, and cheap motorsport toy. In America, the Yugo is still laughed at, but the laughter is not always cruel anymore. Sometimes it is affectionate. Time has turned the worst car into the best conversation piece. The funny thing is that the Yugo's core promise now feels almost radical. It was not a good car by modern standards, and in many ways, it was not even a good car by 1980s standards. But it was an attempt to sell an extremely low-cost new car to people with extremely limited money. That idea has nearly vanished from the modern U.S. market. The average new vehicle transaction price is now around $50,000, and even compact cars and subcompact SUVs routinely cost many times what a low-income buyer can easily manage. Right now, as of mid-2026, the cheapest car you can buy brand new here in the United States is the Hyundai Venue SE, which is currently sitting at a base MSRP of $20,550. This shift came after long-running, genuine, ultra-budget subcompacts like the Mitsubishi Mirage and Nissan Versa were officially discontinued, effectively raising the price floor for a brand new vehicle across the country. Meanwhile, monthly payments, insurance, interest rates, repairs, and registration can turn basic transportation into a financial cliff. For many Americans, especially outside dense transit-friendly cities, a car is not a lifestyle accessory. It is access to work, school, childcare, medical appointments, groceries, and dignity. Nobody needs the Yugo exactly as it was. The thing was a communist mess, some Trotskyite relic that basically demonstrated why a command economy simply does not work. America doesn't need weak carburetors, questionable rust-proofing, fragile interiors, indifferent crash protection, or timing belts treated like tiny grenades. What it needs is the idea of the Yugo done competently. A very simple, very small, very affordable new car built to modern safety and emission standards without pretending every buyer wants a giant touchscreen, luxury-grade trim, 3-row seating, and a monthly payment that causes mild chest pain. The modern bargain car does not have to be glamorous. It has to be safe, reliable, efficient, cheap to insure, cheap to repair, and honest. In other words, it should do what the Yugo promised, not what the Yugo too often delivered. The talk of a Yugo revival shows that this old idea still has emotional power. Plans have been discussed for a new, affordable, retro-inspired Yugo developed with Serbian design talent and aimed at the entry-level market. Whether it becomes real and whether it ever reaches the United States remains uncertain. But the reason people pay attention is obvious. The world is full of expensive vehicles trying to be everything at once. Office, cinema, status symbol, rolling phone, and family command center. There is still room for a little car whose main promise is simply, here is transportation you can afford. The Yugo's American story is easy to mock because, frankly, it brought much of the mockery on itself. It was underdeveloped, overhyped, poorly supported, and often miserable. But it was also bold. It came from an unlikely place, entered the world's toughest car market, sold more than 140,000 examples in the United States, and gave thousands of buyers a chance to own a new car when the alternative was someone else's worn-out hand-me-down. That's important because a bad cheap car is still bad, but the absence of any cheap car at all creates a different kind of failure. In the end, the Yugo was both a terrible car and an important idea wearing terrible upholstery. It was slow, flimsy, funny, and unforgettable. It failed in America, but it failed while trying to solve a real problem: mobility for people with little money. The modern United States does not need to bring back the old Yugo. It needs a better answer to the same question. How does a low-income buyer get safe, basic, independent transportation without being financially flattened? The original Yugo answered with a 3 $3,990 Shrug, and 55 horsepower. The answer today should be much better, but the question has never gone away.